Hello everyone and welcome to another programming tutorial. This video is going to cover JavaScript, more specifically React. We will cover setting up a React environment, writing components, the React lifecycle and state, and we will conclude with a fun little project. This video is a 2.5 free preview pulled from the complete full stack JavaScript course on Udemy. If you enjoy this video, feel free to check out the complete course. Coupon code YouTube gets you lifetime access for only $9.99. You can also find the course in the Learn to Code bundle on my website. I will include links to additional information in the description of this video as well as timestamps. So without further ado, let's get started.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Full Stack JavaScript. So I hope you guys are excited to learn some awesome things and go through building real-world examples using JavaScript, because that's what we're about to set off to do. So the format of this course is going to be a little bit different than courses that I have hosted in the past. And the main reason is because, I guess there's a few reasons. So one of them would be you learn best by doing. And a lot of times there is no bridge between the gap of I know the syntax of the language, but I don't know how to do real world things with it. And so where you learn best by doing, I figure that together we will go through some examples. It does get pretty in-depth around halfway through the course. So we're going to be building 3 applications using JavaScript. The first one is going to be a calculator. And in that project, basically, we just go over the basics of what React is. And so we learn how to create React components and work within the React lifecycle as well. Now, after that, we move on to actually some of the full stack aspects of JavaScript, where we create a REST API and host it, and then we kind of bring it back to React as well, so we can get a good example of how a React application and a REST API written in JavaScript can communicate with each other, and how you can use those two things to build a feature-rich application, I guess. We'll build a blog with it. And then the third application introduces a newer technology. I say newer because it's not new, but it's newer than JavaScript itself and a lot of the other technologies that we're going to be using, which is WebSockets. So traditionally, when you have a client-side application, for instance, a React application, that communicates with an API, it's kind of like a ping-pong request. You send a request and you get a response, and that's all there is to it. It's kind of like one for one. So with a WebSocket, you can actually keep clients connected on the server side, and you can send data to the client whenever it's deemed necessary. And so to demonstrate that capability, we're going to be building a chat application where you can create a user account. You can search for other users and add them, and then message back and forth with them. And so that's going to be pretty fun as well. So first off, what is JavaScript? To put it very simply, it's an interpreted programming language that runs on the client side. So when you write JavaScript on a website, the server that the website is hosted on has nothing to do with executing that JavaScript. The JavaScript code is sent to the browser of the user and interpreted on their machine. So there's different JavaScript rendering engines used in, for instance, Chrome and Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge, etc. So all browsers have a slightly different interpretation. It all generally works the same though, but a lot of times to get some specific browser capabilities working in all browsers is not always possible. And so we're not actually going to cover Internet Explorer at all in this course, because nobody should be using Internet Explorer unless you have like work applications that were coded for Internet Explorer and they won't work for anything else. In that case, use it. But that's beyond the scope of this course. So JavaScript was introduced in 1995. It's evolved quite a bit since its initial, I guess, release. It originally didn't have object-oriented capacities. There were some ways to fake it, but nowadays you can easily create classes and instantiate them with a constructor and all the good stuff. And we're going to be covering that as well. So that version of JavaScript is called ES6, ECMA script 6, and that is what we're going to be using in this course, which also offers the capability to arrow functions, which the syntax of it is a lot cleaner, I find. And so I generally default to writing arrow functions rather than regular functions for the most part. So to get the most out of this course, you're going to want to know how to use HTML, a minimal amount of CSS, just so that we can make things not look absolutely horrendous, and a basic understanding of JavaScript. We are going to take what you do know, and we are going to extend it with real-world applications. You're going to learn how to use React Redux. You're going to learn how to use Loopback.js, which is the REST API framework that we're going to use, which is built on top of Express. You're also going to learn how to install packages through the Node package manager. And Node is basically the environment that we can use to run server-side applications like React's hot load server, which is a way that we can run React in development, and when we make changes to files, it will automatically reload the page in our browser. So it makes development like extremely simple. And then we're also going to learn about WebSockets. So WebSockets, again, are a way that we can add bilinear communication, and the server can keep connections open indefinitely and send messages to clients. Can keep a running list as well. Now, the package that we're going to be using for it is called socket.io. And this, before I actually jumped into using WebSockets, this confused me because this sounds like some service, software as a service offered by IBM or something like that, because that's a domain extension, .io. But it's actually just a standalone library. I mean, not standalone, it does have dependencies, but you know what I mean. You install it to your computer. There's no third-party communication between any services or anything like that. This gives us everything we need to make WebSockets work out of the box. And so it actually, when I say newer, it was released around 2010. And so, well, actually it was in December 2009, Chrome enabled support for WebSockets. And I think it was fully enabled in browsers in 2010. So it's relatively new. It's still almost 10 years old, but when we talk about technologies like PHP and whatnot, it's relatively new. So with that being said, again, you should know HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We're going to take the knowledge that you have and we're going to turn it into applicable knowledge. And by the end of this course, you should be able to build REST API programs, create your own routes, your own callbacks and stuff like that. You should be able to build and work with React applications. installing modules as needed or creating your own. And you will also be able to build a chat application or any other real-time communication system actually that uses WebSockets. The knowledge that we'll be going through in this course will be applicable to a wider range of specific tasks that we perform here. The code for these projects will also be hosted on GitHub. I know a few of my older courses did not have the code hosted for a few of the projects, and I think it's essential, kind of. I no longer have access to that old code, so unfortunately I can't get that content hosted, but what I can do is make sure that the projects that we build together in this course will be hosted on my GitHub page, which is github.com/ and then my name, Nick Germain. And that's me. And so these are actually the libraries right here, Loopback tutorial, React tutorial, and the calculator project as well. And what I will do is make sure that everything is accessible here that we go through, so you guys can go look at the code and kind of use it if you want to help you troubleshoot any issues you might have. Also, feel free to send me a message if you're stuck at anything and you can't figure it out with GitHub and Stack Overflow doesn't seem to be helping. Definitely reach out and I'll do my best to help you with that. So yeah, let's get into it and let's start working with React. So the first thing we're going to have to do is set up an environment to work in. So we're going to need to install a few dependencies and tools that we will use to develop using React and JavaScript. The first thing we're going to need is to install NodeJS. So I don't recall the exact URL, so I'm just going to Google NodeJS download. And this is going to direct you to hopefully nodejs.org/n/download. And if you're on Windows, then you're going to download the Windows installer. And so there's a few different things here. If you're on Linux, what you're going to do is open up Terminal and type in, well, Node might actually already be installed, but if let me see. If you pull up Terminal, you can type in node -- version, and it should give you a version number. If it doesn't, that means that you don't have Node installed. And also another thing we're going to need is npm, which you can do the same thing to verify if you'd like, npm -- version. Now if you don't have either of these installed and you're on Linux, I believe it's just, well, let's say you're on Ubuntu. Okay, so you actually need to add a PPA to your system on Linux in order to install it. So sudo apt install curl, and then you're going to copy this. Well, here, just search install node. It's going to give you instructions that you should copy into your terminal to install, and then you can install node and npm, and you can verify that they're installed using these commands. In the discussion on this video, I will post this link, so let me just paste that over on the side here. Install node Ubuntu. Although if you're using Ubuntu, you probably won't have any trouble with that at all. If you're on Windows, which I think a lot of you guys will be, you will come to nodejs.org/n/download, and you'll find Windows Installer here. You're going to install LTS, just because it's more stable and I feel safer using that for production. You know, if you want to check out latest features, you can install current, but for right now, we're going to go with LTS. Download the Windows installer, either 32-bit or 64-bit, I believe they've actually just straight up stopped making 32-bit processors. I could be wrong. So you're most likely going to want the 64-bit version. If you're on Windows, the way you can verify which version you need is to go to this PC. You're going to right click and click Properties, and it should tell you somewhere here system type. It will say 32-bit or 64-bit. If you've got 64-bit, follow along with 64-bit version. Otherwise, install the 32-bit version. You're going to click on it, and it's going to download a .msi file. I've already got this installed, so I'm going to go a little bit through the setup. It's very straightforward. It's just, you hit next, 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 just like other installers, and it will install Node to your system. It's very important, and by default, the default behavior of the installer is to add the Node library to the path. I'm going to show you this just so you guys can confirm and make sure that that's happening. And this will basically, it will allow your system to know where Node is for when you run the command, and I'll give you guys a breakdown here in a sec. So hit next, I accept the terms, next, you can choose a directory, hit next, and then right here on this screen, you're going to want to make sure add to path looks like this. This means will be installed on hard drive, and these are what the other icons mean. Make sure add to path is going to be installed, and then hit next, and you're going to install it. I'm going to cancel out of this because I already have it installed. When you've got it installed, you're going to hit finish. It shouldn't take too long. Now, if I go back to here and right-click on Properties and Advanced System Settings on the left-hand side, that opens up way over to the left. Let me bring this in here. If you click on Environment Variables at the bottom, you're going to get this list here, and Path is right here. I'm going to click Edit, and what we see is a list of directories that when we run a program from terminal, it will first look in the System32 directory on the hard disk to see if it can find it there. Otherwise, it's going to come to this list right here, so we can see that, where is it? This one right here would be the one that was added, I guess, when you install Node.js. Make sure you see npm or node or something there, and then open up command line PowerShell terminal and run these two commands. You're going to run node -- version, and it should print out a version number on the next line right here, and you're also going to do the same with npm. And it should give you a version number. Now, if we run node, we should get this, which is an interpreter, and we can write JavaScript. So I can say and then we can, of course, console log var name. So we are good to go. So I'm going to Control C out of here and clear. Now the next thing we're going to need to install is Visual Studio Code. So just Google for this. Make sure, actually you could go directly to this link. I'm going to have this there as well. Code.visualstudio.com. Click it download for Windows. It's going to download an installer file. You click keep, and then you're going to run that, and the process is exactly the same. You're going to hit next, 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 and it's going to install Visual Studio to your system. Now the next thing we're going to have to install is React itself. If you go to reactjs.org, which I will also post here in the video, this you can click Get Started and Resources, Tutorials. I don't think it's going to tell us how to install it. All right. Oh, create a new. All right. Well, what we're going to do is install a program through npm. So once you've got it installed, if you had PowerShell open and then you installed Node and those commands aren't working, by the way, you're just going to want to close PowerShell and open up a new instance. It's going to load in the new path variables, and it's going to be able to find the Node and npm libraries. Now, in order to install Node libraries, there's two types of ways you can do it. You can install it globally to the system, which means you can use it in any directory. It's not part of a project. It's not a project dependency. It's just an application that you've installed to your computer using Node. And how we're going to do that is npm install g, and then the package name would go here. So that's the syntax for installing global packages. Now, if you're in a project's directory that does have a package.json file, that means it's a Node project. And so you can install directly into that project. We'll get more into that later. So for right now, go ahead and type in npm install -g space create -react -app and hit enter. Now this process will take a few minutes to complete. I've already got it installed, so it actually didn't take that long at all, which is awesome. So this means now that from the command line we can use the command create react app, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So what I want you guys to do is create a directory for your projects. So how I do this, sorry about that, how I do this is I go to my users directory. You should see, pictures, music, downloads, etc. Just create a new directory, a new folder, and call it projects, which I've got here. We're going to be using this name for our first React application, so I'm going to delete that now. Now, while that's actually deleting, and it's huge because it's deleting Node modules as well from that project, we're also going to install React DevTools for Chrome. Now, if you're not using Chrome, this is highly advised. Install Chrome. So you would go to chrome.google.com, install Chrome, and then Google for React Developer Tools. You're going to find this offered by Facebook. Click Add to Chrome. And we'll get more into what this does later. Just now is a great time to install it. So get that started, and let's jump back into Terminal. So you can pause this video to install React DevTools, come back to it, and I will be right here. So what we're going to do is change directory into projects, and then we're going to issue the command create-react-app space, and now we're going to name a directory name for where we want to create the project in. So in this instance, it's going to just be demo. And this is going to take a few minutes, so I will leave you guys here. This has been how to set up an environment to get working in React. In the next video, we're going to be looking at a basic project structure. I'm going to be going over how to install, well, no, I'll probably go over installing libraries to the project a bit later. So for right now, we're just going to look at the project itself, and let's do that. Alright guys, so once our project gets created, then we can open it up and have a look at it. So for right now, I'm going to close PowerShell. I think that's the last we'll be using that. We're going to open up Visual Studio Code now. So you guys should have this installed. Now, this is the welcome screen. I need to move it over a bit, I guess. So what we're going to see here is a list of recent workspaces and then a section up here to start. So I'm going to click Add Workspace Folder, and that's how we're going to get started. Now what you're going to do is navigate to your projects directory, select the folder that we just created when we used the create React app command, and you're going to hit Add. So on the left hand side here, this is the project structure. So Node Modules is where all project related Node libraries get installed to. So if we scroll down here enough, there's quite a few. We're going to see React. So there we go. Alright, so we've got React Dev Utils, React DOM, etc., etc. So this is where Node libraries are installed to. We are never going to, well, I say that, we're going to try never to modify any of these files, because if we move this project to another computer, this directory won't be here. This is our package.json file, and what this holds is information about the app as well as dependencies. So here we can see React, React DOM, and React scripts. Now, I can't think, oh, React router, yeah. Alright, so what we're going to do, just to show you guys right now how this works, I'm going to go to Terminal and click New Terminal, and it's going to open it inside my demo project. So I'm going to run a command here, npm install, and then react-router. You guys can do the same. Now this is going to install it to the Node modules, but it's not going to do anything with this package JSON. So this file is very important when you're working in a repository with other people. If you're working on a section of an application and in order for it to work you need to install a few libraries, you want this to be updated so that your peers and coworkers can just, in this directory, run npm install. And what this will do is it will go through dependencies, dev dependencies, and it will update or install accordingly to what packages are listed here. So in order to install a package that's not here and save it here, we're going to do this. We're going to type npm install space, and then the package name we want to install, another space, and then dash dash save, and hit enter. Now there's actually, while this is installing, I'm going to show this to you guys. There's a great website for NPM, and you can search packages here. So if I search React, we can see React Redux. We're going to be working with this. React Router, Router DOM, React Scripts, etc. A bunch of React applications, and actually React Strap. If this lets us write Bootstrap, oh it does, in the form of components, this is what we are going to be using for our application. We're gonna write a calculator application once we learn enough to be able to do that, and so we'll be using React Strap at that point. Now, if I close the package.json file, we can see it's been modified. It's also colored yellow, gold, because it's been modified, kind of brown actually. So this has installed React Router, and using the save flag, if I open this up, we're going to see React Router has now been added here with the latest version. So if now I give you this project, which actually I'll host it on GitHub, but if you take this project and now you won't have a Node Modules library, I'm not going to be pushing that, that's huge. What you're going to do is in the demo directory, you're just going to type npm install. It's going to go through here and install all the dependencies for you. So that is all. The package lock JSON is kind of the current state of what's in node modules and what's required and stuff like that. We are never going to touch this except deleting it, as sometimes if you have a conflict or something's not working related to packages, you can delete that and then run npm install. It's going to install it. We have git ignore, which has been added to ignore certain files, and here you'll see we don't include. So this, when we push to GitHub repositories, this ignore file will selectively ignore files, so it won't push them. So we're not going to push log files to a projects directory. We're not going to push a build or the node modules. So this is why the node modules library or directory will not be in any GitHub repositories that you guys that I push to GitHub for you guys in this course. Now, moving on, we have two directories, public and source. The public directory is used for content that, how do I say this? There's two parts to this application. There is the HTML file that has the title property and the CSS, JavaScript files imported, and also a mount point called root. So this is where our React application is going to mount to. So we will not be touching this file very often. It's just there. Now also in the public directory we can make an images directory, a CSS directory, if we want to, hard code some links or scripts into our document. Now the source directory is where all the React goodness exists. We have service worker. We are probably never going to touch this. It should work out of the box. There's a logo, there's a CSS file, and then an app CSS file, an index.js and an app.js, and a test. So we'll cover tests later on in the course. For right now, the two files we're going to look at is index.js and app.js. So let's go through this here. So in ES6, which is the JavaScript implementation we are going to be working with in this course, you can import from libraries. So React from React, I'm going to show you guys how this works. So the statement import React, it's looking for an export from this library. Now you can also do relative imports, which we'll talk in a sec, but just to give you a rough idea of what an import is, I'm going to go find the React directory again. And I'm going to open up index.js. Now as you can see, oh, I lost the, there we go. Alright, so import React from this library. What this is doing is it's opening up, oh, I lost the other one now. Alright, bear with me here. We'll get this sorted. There we go, I've got both files open. That was tough. Alright, so what this file does, the React file that it's referencing here, is it's exporting a JavaScript file. So if I open up CJS and let's just look at React development, this is going to export as well. So we're never going to touch this. It's the React library itself. But if we go down to the bottom, we see model exports React. So this is being exported to here, which is then being exported to our main index.js file. And from this we can import React. So that's what an import looks like. Down here So if we're working with libraries, this is what we're going to do. You can also import from relative sources. So this is attempting to import a component called app or a class called app from the app.js file. You don't need to add .js to the location of the export. So if I open up app.js, we'll see class app extends component. This is what we're exporting. But this just builds it. It doesn't export it. If I scroll down to the bottom, we're going to see export default app. And this statement exports it so that it can be imported here. Are we good? All right. So then we use React DOM to render a component to an element. That's as basic as it gets. So we're getting the element by ID root, which we saw in the public directories index HTML file, and we are putting this React component there. So if I open up the app.js file, whatever's in the render method is going to be imported here, which we'll cover in the next video. We'll cover writing applications and components. So that's all there is to this video. That's the project structure of a React application for the purposes of this video anyway. We'll get more into it. Now, to run the application, which we're going to end with, you're going to type npm start. And this is probably going to open a tab in your browser. Which it did, but it was the wrong one. It didn't tell me what port it's at. Okay. Oh, it's 3000. Okay. So once it compiles and loads, it will host it on localhost port 3000. And this is what we see. That's what the app.js file renders. So in the next video, we're going to delete this app.js file. We're going to build our own component, and we're going to mount it in the index file. Now that we know the basic workings of a React application, or at least a very rudimentary one, let's actually go ahead and build a component. So I'm going to delete app.js and app.css. Alright. Now if I save it, it fails to compile because it cannot find app.js. It's attempting to import here. There's no file, there's no export, so it's not going to happen. So in the source directory, create a new file and call it let's call it application.js. Now in here, the first thing we need to do is to import React and React's component class so that we can create our own component. And so let's do that. So import React component, and the curly braces there are important, from React. Now, drop down a few lines, and we're actually going to start building out our component. So we're going to write class application extends component, and we're going to open that up. Now, by itself, this does not export it, so every time we create a class that we want to use in another file, if it's going to be imported in another file, we're going to need to export it. So the syntax for that is export default and then the class name. So application. And we're going to save. Now in our index.js file, I'm going to remove that import and replace it with our new one. So import the export's name, so application from, and here we need to specify it's in the current directory, so /application, and hit semicolon. And by itself this will still fail because it's attempting to mount app. We don't have a class called app. It says app is not defined. So we are going to have to render our own component. So a component in React, so in ES6, is going to be written the same as HTML is. So you're going to open it with a pointy bracket, and then the application, and then it's self-closing. So you're going to close it. It can be self-closing. For the most part, it will be. We'll cover into how to wrap. We'll cover how to wrap components later on in the course, I'm sure. But for right now, this is the syntax for mounting our component. Now, if we go back to our browser, we don't have render. So this is a necessary method within our class. So what we need to do now is in application. The one essential method for a React component is called render. And what this method does is it returns HTML or text or variables, whatever the case may be. So we're going to return, just for right now, a string, which we're going to say hello world. And then we're going to end that with a semicolon. Now if we go back to our application, we see that that's exactly what we get. Just a string. And if I right click and go to inspect, we're going to see that it has mounted into the div by ID root. We also will get into React Dev Tools shortly, but for right now, we can see that it's mounting. So a few things about the render method itself. It's like any other method. You can declare variables and whatnot and use them. And we can return in brackets HTML content. So I could change that to h1 hello world, and then hit save, Control S, and then open up my browser. We should get an h1. Now you'll notice that I'm not refreshing this, and that's because when you run npm start, what's happening is it loads a hot loader, which every time a change is detected, it will recompile and then refresh any connected clients, in this case, this browser. So this is automatically updating when I write new code and save it. Now, we can't, in this return method, have a top-level element and then another top-level element. We're going to see an error here. JSX expressions, this is ES6, JavaScript, the current implementation, must have one parent element. This means we can only have one top-level element. So I'm going to wrap both of these in a div and call it a day. There we go, problem solved. So now if I save, you're going to see it's going to compile, and the browser automatically refreshes, and we get this here. We get this. So that's basically how to write a render method in our own component. Now we can also print out variables in here and use content like that. And how we do that is within the render method, not the return statement. Within the render method itself, we can declare variables, so I'm going to write let. And for those of you who took my, I think it was called like complete front-end development course, and you learned JavaScript there, we used the keyword var to create variables. And this has scoping issues. If we declare it here, it can be used outside of this function, and that's not really safe. So we're going to always scope our variables correctly. We're going to either use let or const. So const is it basically means it's a constant. It can't be changed after it has been set. So we're going to say let name equals, and then that. We're going to save it. And now how we actually use this within the return statement is similar to other technologies that use curly braces. If you've used any model view controller kind of framework, this should be second nature to you by now. But in this instance, it's just one curly braces that wraps it. And then we print out the variable name. And we can load up our browser, and we see that it prints it out correctly. So I think that's it as far as this goes. We've just written a component. We've mounted it into a DOM element by ID root. And in the next video, we're going to talk about more special React methods for the component class. Now that we have a basic understanding of how a React component renders its content, we're going to talk a little bit more about the life cycle of an application, and we will get more into each one of these methods later on. Right now I'm just going to show you a few of them. So the first one is constructor, which can take in a props argument, and it can instantiate the parent class by running super with the props. Now, this is going to only be run when the application component is instantiated, not every time it re-renders, and we'll talk more about re-rendering right now. So, the life cycle of a component is basically a string of functions that get called to determine, based on variable changes maybe, whether something needs to be updated and re-rendered. So there's the component will mount, and this gets passed two arguments, the props that it will mount with, and state. There's the component did mount, which also gets props state, and these are the props in the state that it mounts with. So if I console log mounted with props and state, and then save it, we can go back to our browser and look in the console, and it says mounted with undefined undefined. Also, we can see we have a useless constructor as of right now because it doesn't actually do anything. We'll get more into that after. And then there's a few methods that get called during a state change, which is component will receive props. It takes in the props. And this actually gets called before it mounts because it will receive properties when it mounts. Well, hopefully. And every time it re-renders as well, or a property changes, it receives the properties all over again. And then there's two more. Component will update, gets props and state, and these are the properties and state that it will update to. So if the properties update, and we'll get more into the props and state here in the next video, but for right now, basically, this is going to be a JavaScript object. So will this, or undefined, actually. And this will update. So you could test. So this props is the current props. So you could compare, let's say you had a property called name. So you could say, if this props name doesn't equal props name, and then you could do something. And then component did update, and this is the safer way to handle component updates, because I think they're actually taking out the will method, so component will update and component will mount, because people are using them improperly. So component did update gets triggered when a re-render happens as well, and this is the current, or these are the old properties. So in this instance, component will update. You can still access this props for the current properties, and the props variable that's getting passed in here is the new properties that are getting passed to it, and the reverse is true with component did update. These are the old properties, and you can access the current properties by this props. And then whatever, so name. So I'm going to save this. This does nothing right now. It just it just logs mounted with, and then undefined, undefined. And that's okay. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about updates and the state itself. So what we're going to do is learn, so these methods basically get triggered, during the life cycle of an application. We can also write our own methods. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So the simplest way I can do this is in the constructor, which will remove the unnecessary constructor error, useless constructor. This will remove that error. We're going to set this dot state equals and then an object, and what we're going to set is a property called count is 0. And I'm going to hit save. Now this does nothing right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to get that count variable into the render method. We're going to type let, and then we're going to wrap in curly braces count equals this dot state. And what this does is it basically gets the count variable from the state. Now we're going to need a button. So in the span right here, let's say button, and let's just add in, click me. And then in the H1 element, I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to replace it with the text. You clicked the button. Now we're going to print the count variable here, count times. So I'm going to save this. We're going to come back over to our browser, and it says you clicked the button 0 times. We haven't clicked it yet. And if I click it, well, it doesn't do anything because we haven't rigged it up yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a method here called handle click. And this is the way we're going to be writing methods, so we don't have to bind them ourselves. They're going to get, it's a variable equal to a function. It's just how we're going to do it. So what we're going to do is in the button call, so in the handle click, so let's rig this up right now. So on click. Now this is a property. So if we render, well, we'll get to that after. So notice it's camel case, so on click. So the HTML5 property is called on click all lowercase. This is going to be different. If you're migrating static HTML with JavaScript handlers to React, this is going to be something you want to pay attention to. So what we're going to do is equals and then curly braces. All right, now we can pass the event. It can so we can capture the event of the button click, and then we're going to send it over to this dot handle click. All right, so good so far. Save. I'm going to go ahead and open up our browser, and right now this does nothing still because our handle click function doesn't do anything. So for right now, very simply, I'm going to console log clicked, just so we can actually see it do something. I'm going to save it. Now let's go back over to our application and have the console open and click the button, and we can see now it's actually, clicking it and doing something. So that's good. Now it's important to note that if you don't have this bit right here, it's going to try to do this consistently in your application. See, as soon as it mounts, it calls that function, and it doesn't do anything else. So we need to have something. If there's no event, you can just put brackets and then the arrow. We're going to pass it this function. So on click, this happens. Now, really what we want to do here is we want to update the count variable to how many times they've clicked the button so that it will print out down here in the render method. So there is another built-in method to the React component called setState. And this takes an object as a parameter and an optional callback, which we won't be using right now, but I'm sure we will get to it. So we're going to type this dot set state, also camel case, and then we're going to pass in an object. All right. So what this object is going to be is the new state that we want to set. So we're just going to set count to more than this state count. So count is going to be this dot state dot count plus 1. And I'm going to hit save. So now we have everything rigged up, and we're going to finally see the fruits of our labor. Let's jump over into our browser and let's start clicking this button. See this? All right. Now that we've got a handle on how to work with the state, we are going to, I was going to do something. What was I going to do? Oh, right, the component did update. Which takes a props and a state. So right now I'm going to console log updated from, and we're going to print the old state, to this dot state. So I'm going to save this. And we're going to go back into our browser, load up the console, and click. Now the first time we do this, we're going to see updated from the old state, which is count equals 0, to count equals 1. And every time we click the button, that event, or that function, gets called, or triggered. So that is how to work with the state of a React application on a very basic level. Now we could do something really stupid here. Now, let's do something really stupid. Because every time the state changes, this method gets called, we can do something really stupid in here and set the state. So this dot set state, and this is going to produce an error. We're going to set it to this state count plus 1. And the error that it's going to get is maximum depth exceeded, and that basically means how many times, how deep can a state change go within one state change. So I'm going to click the button and we're going to see everything lock up. And that's because this is repeatedly triggering this to happen. See? Which is very stupid. However, we can hook into the component update like this. I'm going to set a property in the state called over 10 to false. And then what we're going to do here, we're going to say if this dot state dot count is more than 10, this dot set state over 10 equals true. Now this is also going to have, it's also going to spit an error. So let me just show you guys this h3 beat high score of 10. Save. Because what's going to happen here is the component's going to update and it's going to say if it's over 10. So this is going to trigger an error when the state gets updated to 11. And then we're going to get the maximum depth exceeded. So let's go back into our application. Oh, sorry. That's right. So so that always is going to say beat the high score of 10 because we haven't added any logic. So what we're going to do is we're going to write some more JavaScript embedded in the HTML here, or the DOM. We're going to basically do an if statement in kind of an inline way. We're not going to type if, that we can't do that. But we can use ternary operators. We're going to just open up some brackets here, and we're going to say this dot state dot over 10. You could just leave it at this. This will resolve to true or false. And we're going to say question mark. So if it is over 10, if that returns true, do something, and a colon, otherwise null. Otherwise we don't care. So I'm going to copy this and paste it up here. So now if over 10 resolves to true, we're going to print out beat high score of 10, and this operates the same way as a top level wrapped component. We can't have multiple top level elements. If we wanted to, we'd have to wrap them, just on a side. So let's go back into our application and prepare to destroy this application once we get to 11. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then when I click this one more time, we're going to get the maximum depth exceeded error, because what happened was it updated to 11 and it called this function and it's like, oh, it's over 11, so I'm going to set the state to over 10 equals true. And then this setting of state triggers this again and it gets stuck in an infinite loop. So what we can do is add a little bit more logic here to sort this out. And that's, so if the state is over, if the count state property is over 10 and this dot state doesn't equal state, so this means if the state has changed, so what we can do is actually the state count. So we're going to only have this called if state is if the count is over 10 and if the state count is not the same as the new state count. See? So this is only going to make it trigger once. So I'm going to come back into my browser and we're going to click this. So that just happened once, because when we set the over 10 to true, this is going to trigger this method, but the old state count is going to be the same as the new one, so this won't get triggered again. Now this will get called repeatedly every subsequent. So let me console log here. Updating over 10. So I'm going to save this, and we're going to watch the console here, and I'll show you what I mean. Every button click after 10 will trigger that update to reset over 10 to true, even though it's completely unnecessary. So we're going to add a little bit more logic here in a sec, but for right now, just click up to 10. We don't get any logs, and then one more time, we get that, update over 10. So it's setting over 10 to true again. And we keep clicking it, and it keeps setting it, which is unnecessary. Right now, it doesn't really matter for performance, but you're always going to want to keep in mind of having a minimum amount of stuff happening to save performance. So we're going to say, if over 10 is false, then we need to set it to true, right? So after that happens, every subsequent button click that changes the count, and the count is over 10, we're also going to check and this dot state dot over 10. So we're going to say and not. So if this resolves to false, then we will set it. This makes sense? So we're going to save it and refresh the application, and we're going to see that over 10 getting set just one time. And we beat the high score of 10. I'm going to click, and we see that it's not setting that property over and over again. And we've just made this application, this very basic application, about 50% more efficient. And that's very important when you're working with React. It's very easy to get some errors in your React applications just because of not thinking in the React way. So that is how to work with the state. In the next video, we're going to, I guess we'll talk about the properties itself. Alright guys, so let's get into the properties of a React component. We've discussed the state of a component and also how to update and use the state. And we've started using kind of embedded JavaScript within a return statement, which contains both HTML content and I guess just regular JavaScript like if statements. You can map over properties, and we'll get into all that at some point. For right now, we're going to break out our high score HTML into its own component. So for this, in the source directory, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it highscore.js. Now, as with creating any other React component, the first thing you need to do is import React and component from React. And we're going to create the class with the same name as the file itself. So class highscore extends component. And now we are going to build a constructor, which actually, no. Let's just create the render method. And we're going to return our beat high score text. So I'm going to copy it and paste it right there. And then at the bottom of the file, we're going to say export default high score. Sorry, I just realized that I could zoom in a bit, and that will probably help you guys out. So it's a very simple component. Just we're gonna always print out this h3 element for right now. So I'm gonna save this, and then in application, we've exported it as high score, so we need to import it as high score. So import high score from, now it's in the current directory and it's called high score. And let's remove this, and for right now we are just going to embed high score. So the way this is done, just like in our index.js file where we wrote application here and it's that component that we imported, when you embed a component into your other components, it's written like, imagine it kind of like this is an HTML element. So it's self-closing because there's no child elements, and we'll get into that at another point, but you could actually also write it like that. So just using components, embedding them, is very similar to working with HTML. So I'm going to save this, and now I actually need to open up a new terminal and get this started again because I'm recording this on a different day than the last video. So in the demo directory, I just type npm start and hit enter, and it's going to parse the application, it's going to compile it, and then it's going to open a new tab in my browser, which it has just done, and it's loading now. Alright, so instantly we see we have a problem. The component is embedded, and it's always printing it out even when we don't beat the high score. Now, something I mentioned previously is the React developer tools. So if you right click on that, down here in the console that it brings up, there's a new tab called React. So when you click on that, it allows you to inspect the components themselves. See how that says high score? When I right click on that and go to the right here, it says the properties are an empty object. And so that's a problem. What we need to do is pass it in some properties so that it only displays when it is in fact above 10. So how we do that, you see this on-click event in the button. Use this as a reference, how to use properties. So in HTML, if you want to add an ID to a component, you do this. If you want to add a class to a component, you do that. And that's called a property of a DOM node. Now, just a note, when you're working with classes like CSS classes in React, the class name is actually reserved in JavaScript using the class property. So you actually have to use class name. And this will apply a CSS class name. So we're not going to do that right now. Right now we're learning how to embed React properties. So in high score, which is a self-closing element, I'm going to drop down to the next line, and I'm going to type in over 10. You can create any property that you want. So in CSS, there's certain properties that do certain things. So you can set a class name or an ID of an element, and there's all the property names that you can use in HTML for the most part are predefined. In React, when you're passing properties, you just make them up however you want to. So in this case, we're going to create a property called over 10, and we're going to set it to this state over 10. Now, we're going to, in order to use JavaScript within the return method, you need to wrap it in curly braces. And so that's what we're going to do here. If it's a variable property that you're passing in as a prop, you're going to need to wrap it with these curly braces. Now I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to go back over to Chrome. And if I right-click on this component here, and then go to React, sometimes it doesn't, but it should like auto-expand to that element. So I'm going to try again. It doesn't really save much time now, but once you get like 30 levels in, it definitely saves time to do it this way. And now you'll see high score over 10 equals false. And if I click on this, on the right hand side, the property is displayed here, over 10 false. Now up on the application level, We see props as an empty object, but we see the state is here. And we can toggle this if it's a true or false. So let's go and click the button. And as we click it, we can see the count is updating in the bottom right. Now if I go to the high score component, we'll see the property is set to false. If I keep clicking the button, when the state changes on the application, when over 10 becomes true, it will re-render the application component and determine which children components need to be re-rendered with new properties or context. And so in this instance, when we click the button one more time, high score will change. It will re-render with the new property of over 10 equals true, which is all managed by the state of the application. So you'll see that that toggled over to true as soon as I clicked the button. If I come back into this component here and look at the props on the right, over 10 equals true, and then we can toggle that as well if we wanted to. So it's still displaying high score over 10 all the time, even when we haven't clicked the button 11 times. And so what we're going to do is go back over to Visual Studio, and into our high score component we are going to create an if statement. So if this props, so this is how you access the properties of this high score component. If this props over 10, then we're going to return this. Else, now here's an interesting thing. In React, every component needs to return something from the render method. If I just leave this like this, I believe I'll get an error in the console. So let's go back over here. It says nothing was returned from the render. And so that means we always need to return something. And it actually tells you here what to do. If you want to return nothing, return null. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to return null. So I'm going to save. Back over to our component. And I'm going to just click this button. And if I right click here and inspect the page, we'll see that the component high score is being rendered, but there's no content of that component because over 10 is false. Now keep an eye down here, because what happens is as soon as I hit 11, that component is going to re-render, it's going to reparse that if statement, and it's going to return content now. Beat high score of 10. Now in React, you can also pass integers, strings, or booleans. You can also pass functions. So I'm going to pass in a function, and it's sort of, well actually we've done that right here as well. So onClick is a property that gets sent to that component, and we're going to do the same thing here. So on reset, and again you can name these whatever you want to, we're going to capture the event, and we're going to kind of pipe it over into this reset count, and we would do this to take in the event if we wanted to. So now I'm going to write a new method called reset count that's going to take an event, and in this method all I'm going to do is reset the state to count is 0 and over 10 equals false. So this dot set state count is going to be 0 and over 10 is going to be false. I'm going to save this. And now that we've passed this property in, we're actually going to need to use it here. So in the H3 element, I'm going to create a button, and I'm going to say on click. So we're going to capture the event. We're going to pipe it over to this props on reset. And I'm just going to make the button say reset. So once we hit 10, or once we hit 11 actually, we'll be able to reset the score. So let's go ahead and jump over to Chrome and let's have a look at what happens as we click this button. Okay, so now we've got this beat high score of 10. And we see the component rendered here, and there's a button. And when we click this, it's going to reset the parent to 0 and over 10 to false. So reset, and it returns the state of the application to the default, which was 0 and false. Now, by default, this button click takes an event parameter. So what we can do in this instance, when the function that calls a property function or another function has the same parameters being input and output, we don't need to do all this fancy jazz. All right? We can just erase this, have the method name, and don't pass in anything. So I'm going to save this, and then in application, just to prove that it still gets the event, I'm going to console log event is, and then E. Now I'm going to save this, and back over to our application. I'm going to need to click this button until we get to 11. And now this reset button is here, and I'm going to go into the console, and I'm going to click reset. And we can see that we did get the event. And that's because, again, this button emits the event as the single parameter. And this function takes in the event as a single parameter as defined right here. Right here, sorry. Wrong on click. Now we can do this again here as well, because this method takes in the event and the initiating button emits the event as the single parameter. So let's erase this and erase this. So it's just this dot and then the name of the function with no parameters specified. It's going to take care of that automatically. So I'm going to save. We're going to go back to our application. We're in the console. We're going to click until we get to 11. And then we're going to reset, and the event is still passed. So that is working with properties, both methods and variables, and how to use them, and how they work, really, how they automatically update as necessary. And this is part of the reason why React can be so fun to work with, because it manages all the re-rendering and when to do it, largely on its own, although we can, I guess, encourage it to make or not make certain updates as we go through. Alright guys, so now we're going to learn how to use CSS within React. It's pretty straightforward. What I'm going to do is, I had to reopen my editor, so I'm going to rerun the application here. And then in the source directory, I'm going to create a new folder called CSS. This is going to load up here, so just let that do its thing. In the CSS directory, I'm going to create a new file called style.css, and we're going to start making some CSS changes. So if you guys have taken any of my other courses, you will know that I enjoy writing my CSS within the browser itself. So I'm going to select that button, and in the element styles I'm going to start shaping it through using CSS. So let's just do something quick and simple. Padding is going to be 10 pixels. Border is going to be none. Border radius, oh, that's weird. That went way down there. Alright. Border radius is going to be 50 pixels. And let's change the padding to 10 pixels and then 30 pixels. Letter spacing is going to be 1 pixel. Text transform uppercase. And then one more. Just change the color of this a bit. And so that's our one rule. So I'm going to copy that and then refresh the page so we can see that it's not applied. And then in my style file, I'm going to target body button, and we're going to copy those there. And then inside of my application file, all we need to do is import the CSS file. So rather than importing something from the file, we're just going to go ahead and write import and then the path name. So in this case, it's going to be CSS style.css. Going to save it, and then we wait for this to reload, and the style sheet has been included. It's literally that simple. And then a really cool thing is that in the style sheet, this is where it's imported into the application. It's going to be recompiled automatically when it changes, basically. So let's go ahead and add background color of red, and I'm going to save, and it will automatically refresh or reload that. In fact, it doesn't even refresh, and then this will be the color of every button as such. So that's a really basic look at CSS. But now let's, well, we have enough, I guess. So what we're going to do now is, by using what we've just learned, I want you guys to build a calculator. So you guys can do it in whatever way you think will work. Just make sure it has the number buttons and then the operations like the plus and minus button. And yeah, make it look like a calculator. And when we come back in the next video, I will build mine. Or you guys can just build one along with me. If you're feeling a bit eager though, feel free to build the calculator and then compare it to what we build in the next video. Alright guys, welcome back. If you built the calculator on your own, great job. If you didn't yet, we're going to do a great job right now. So, I'm back in my projects directory in Terminal, and I'm going to run create React app, and I'm going to call this calc. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to do all the heavy lifting of installing React and the React dependencies. Now in the meantime, let's discuss a few of the concepts. Basically, we're going to need a grid with buttons. Ideally, it will be, well, we'll make it flex a little bit. I'm not sure how. From a design standpoint, we're not going to be using any libraries like Bootstrap. You can if you would like to, but we will cover how to integrate Bootstrap using ReactStrap actually in the next video. Or one of the next videos, I'm not sure exactly. So let's just give it a few minutes to get everything set up for us. And in fact, I'll probably pause the video and come back when it's done. Alright guys, that actually didn't take too long. So hopefully by this point you guys have followed along, and we've now got a project called Calc ready to get going. So I'm going to cd into that directory, and I actually don't need terminal anymore. We are going to create add workspace folder, and so let me get project calc. There we go, and I'm going to add this, close the welcome screen, and then let's get started. So if we're discussing a calculator, one of the first things we'll need, I guess, would be, well, the buttons. But let's get rid of this. Let's use the existing app container here. We're going to create an input field, which will house the actual current kind of mathematical equation, I guess. So let's go ahead and make an input field, and the class name is going to be result. There's going to be no placeholder type. Let's go ahead and write text, and then value, let's say, is going to be this state current. Alright, so now let's go instantiate the state. So constructor, we're going to pass in the props, and now we're always going to instantiate the parent class, so run super props. You're going to pass in props to the super method, and then we're going to say this dot state equals current. It's going to be basically nothing in there, and then previous is going to be an array, and we will cover that later. Yeah, alright. So let's go ahead and save this, and then open a terminal, and I'm going to run npm start. Now it's going to load up our application here. And we'll really only need a view like this, right? So we could actually kind of tile it in a way. Yeah, that should be enough. Alright, so we got some room on the left, some room on the right, and we're good to go. Alright, so we've got our input field, and right now it does nothing. And that's because we need the grid of buttons, and those are going to need to be responsive, so we're going to need to add some CSS to it. Before that, in the source directory, I'm going to add a folder, and I'm going to call it components. And then in the source directory, I'm going to add another folder, and I'm going to call it CSS. And then in components, let's go ahead and create a new file, and it's going to be called button.js. So we're going to create the new React component. As always, you need to import React, and then in these curly braces, component from, and then all lowercase, React. So we're importing React, and I just realized that this has zoomed out again. Let's zoom that in a bit. There we go. I hope this is big enough. Okay, all right. So let's drop down a few lines. And class button extends component. So we're always, when we write a React component, we're always going to extend React's component class. Now the first thing we need is a render method, and then we need to return some HTML, and the HTML that we return is going to be a div with a button inside of the div. So we're going to need some props so that each time we instantiate a button, the button knows what it is and what it should do. So let's go ahead and add button class calc button, just because we are going to be styling these. And then for right now, let's just print the number 1 there. And then we also need to export default button. And now we're ready to use this and start creating our grid of buttons in app. But we need to import button. So we're going to import button from, in the current directory, we're going to look for a components directory and then button. We're going to save this, and then down here we're going to start creating rows, probably with a clear fix after it. And well, we can just space things. If we're thinking about a calculator, I'm going to open up calculator here. So it's not going to be fully featured, but it is going to be something like this. So we can look at how it reacts as it gets big and small. And we're going to do something similar, except we're just going to probably keep it like this view. So 4 across, we're going to have this row all the way to this row. So we're going to need a 4 by 5 grid. So how we're going to do this is we're going to create a variable, a constant variable called buttons, and it's going to be an array, because we're going to map through these buttons, which we haven't done before. So you will get to learn how to do that. So what we're going to need to do is objects, and we're going to have a symbol property. So let's say C. We're going to have probably a column width. Yeah, we'll need to create some grid structure here, and Bootstrap would help a lot. Yeah, but instead of going and integrating Bootstrap itself, we're just going to have to do this ourselves. So call width, calls, let's say, it's going to be 1, and then action. All right. So we're going to need to define some actions or some functions that each button will call that will update it accordingly. Let's say action is going to be this, reset. All right, so let's create a reset function. And it's going to do this. Set state result equals, the result is going to be 0. And actually, let's make that a string and set the default as well. So I'm going to save. It's going to refresh with 0 in there. Good stuff. And we have our first button, which we haven't used at all yet. We will get to that. And let's think about the layout, basically. So, I mean, we're not going to need all these buttons. That can be, like, this isn't the usual layout for a calculator. I'm going to check on my phone and see what the calculator there looks like. Oh, it's very similar. Okay. Divide, multiply, minus, plus, and okay. So we're going to basically have a large C button here, which is going to reset it. So the columns are actually going to be 3. And then we're going to have a divide button. So, symbol is going to be, we don't have a divide button, so we'll have to use a slash. Calls is going to be 1, and action is going to be this. Add to current. Yes, all right. So we're going to need a new method called add to current. And what this method will do is it's going to take in a parameter called new, or we can't do that. I like short variable names, but some things just will not work. So add to current, and we'll say symbol. And then going to this set state, and we're going to say this state current, rather no, we need to say current is going to be equal to this state current plus symbol. So essentially what we're doing here is we're just going to add the symbol, and most of the methods that we, or most of the buttons here that we work with are going to use that function. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to say 7. Let's say 8. Paste again. 9. Let's say times, or an X. And that's going to be on the right hand side. So now we're going to start the next row down, 4, 5, 6 minus 4, 5, 6, and then minus. Then next to last row, we're going to have 1, 2, 3 plus. So 1. Oops, I zoomed way down there. So 1, 2, 3, and then a plus symbol. And then another row, and in this row we're going to have 0, the columns is going to be equal to 2, and then we're going to have period, just a regular dot, and then the equals symbol. Okay, so we have columns ranging from 1, 2 to 3. We can convert those to percentages, which we are going to do, but for right now we need to actually map them out. We've got all these created and we're not using them yet in the application. And I just realized that so far we're at about 15 minutes in this video, so it's probably going to be cut into 2 parts. So I'll have to find a good spot to cut that. But for right now, we're going to map out these. We're going to learn how to map components. So this is an ES6 arrow function. So where we're going to be using a function or JavaScript code within the HTML, we need to open curly braces, and the variable we've got defined is buttons. So we're going to map through that. And how you map through an array is you type the array name dot map, and this is a method, so you're going to open up parenthesis and you're going to open up another set. So rather than typing function and then parentheses and then curly braces, with ES6 imagine that function is written right here and just put your parameters in here. So the buttons are going to map through, and each individual button is going to be callable within this scope as btn, and then we're also going to pass the index number, and I will tell you guys why in just a moment. So right now we're going to use an arrow to move over into the scope of this mapping function. And what we're going to do is we are going to return button, and we are going to say symbol is going to be btn.symbol. So for instance, the this row right here, this column C divide 789, that's going to be passed in as props.symbol. Calls is going to be equal to button.calls, and then action. So here's the tricky part. I'm just going to leave that for a second. I'm going to close the button component. So what we need to do is we need to receive a symbol to then pass to add to current. So what we're going to do is open up parenthesis, and we're going to say symbol, and then we're going to use an arrow to call button.action. Save. There we go. Oh man, something's messed up. And do you know what it is? We haven't done anything within the button component itself. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it right now. I'm going to add all this code to a GitHub repository, and I will post it in the link for this video or in the discussion so that you guys can access the finished version of the code. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed the break. What we're going to do right now is finish up this calculator. So we need some styles, but before we even need styles, we need to hook up what number is displayed in the buttons and what the action does. So as we can see here, the properties inside the button component, we are going to have symbol, calls, and action. So what I'm going to do is the first thing that we can do really simply and see it is get rid of that one. We're going to open up curly braces, and we're going to say this dot props dot symbol and hit save, and now you're going to see all the symbols have just populated into the buttons, and that's exactly what we want. Now another thing is that we need to rig up the action. So this props action is a function that takes in the symbol and passes the symbol over to the button's action function, which in this case is add to current or reset. So we're going to create an onClick handler. We're going to take the E parameter for no reason, just so that we can use the arrow. I mean, it would be much more accurate to do this. An empty parameters list, and then we're going to say this dot props dot action, and we're going to pass through this dot props dot symbol. We're going to save it, and now when we press this, nothing's happening. So let's troubleshoot this a little bit. in add to current, let's go ahead and console log symbol save, and then we're going to open up our console here. Alright, so a few things. And good thing for JavaScript for catching this. We don't use class, we use class name. Save this. And then another thing is that within a mapping function, the rendered component needs to have a unique key, which is just going to be the index, and that's why we're passing in I there. Alright. Now another thing is that we're setting a value here without actually setting a non-change event. So let's set default value. Actually no, we need that set to value. So, because if we do this, right, it's not going to update it. So we do need value. And then we're still not getting any action here happening. So what we're going to do is there's some disconnect between this prop here calling the action. Oh, I know what it is. We forgot the parameters and symbol. So let's save this, and then there we go. There we go. So we're getting input. Good stuff. We do need to change a few things. So if this current state is 0, and well, there's going to be a few different ways we can do this. I'm not sure exactly how right now. For right now, let's get that styled up a bit. So if a column is 2, alright, so let's go over to this. And in the div itself, we're going to need to add a class name that's going to be dependent on a variable. And that's going to be calls. So this props calls. It's going to be either 1, 2, or 3. And so what we're going to need to do is, instead of opening up quotations here, where we're going to have to use that value or that variable, we're going to open up curly braces. And now in here, the way that we're going to do this, we're going to embed the variable within a text string. And in ES6 with React, the way that we do this is inside these curly braces, you're going to need to find the backtick key on your keyboard. It's usually directly below the escape key, and it's going to look something like this when you do it. What we're going to do now is type in regular text. So in this case, it's going to be column dash, and then within here, we're going to embed the variable, this props calls. So we're going to need to put a $, and then 2 curly braces. And we can now write JavaScript within this little tag here. So we're going to say this dot props dot calls. And I'm going to save it. And now if we look, we can see column 3. Now column 3 is going to have to be 75% wide. So width is going to be 75%, and float is going to be left. So now we need to add a CSS file. So within here, we're going to create a new file in the CSS directory called style.css. Going to hit enter, and we're going to say column-3, and this is a class, so we need that dot at the front. Width 75%, float left. Column 2, we're going to say width is going to be 50%. and float left. Sorry, float left. There we go. And column -1 is going to be width 25% and float left. I'm going to hit save. This is going to refresh. No, it's not, because we haven't included the style sheet within our application. So in the app.js file, I'm just going to close this sidebar for a moment. We're going to import, in the current directory, look for CSS style.css. Going to end it with a semicolon and hit save. And there we go. This is our calculator's very basic layout, but all the buttons are far too small. So what we're going to do is we're going to style the buttons all together. So I'm going to add a button class. Not even a class. Actually, I think we did use a class that we can key into. So I'm going to copy calc button here, calc-button. And I'm going to write button. So this is going to be the element we're targeting, and then this is the class name of the element. So if there's a button with this class name, this is the style that it's going to get. So we're going to need to play around with this a bit. So I'm going to save this, and we should get a stylable element here for button, calc button. I'm going to say width is going to be 100%. And that's already looking a lot better. I'm going to say padding. Actually, let's go with height. And let's say 100 pixels. That's looking a lot better. Border is going to be 2 pixels solid. We're going to make this gray. Actually, a lighter gray. Darker, and then the background is going to be lighter. There we go. Now the font size itself is going to need to come up to maybe 22 pixels or 32. There we go. We are making a lot of progress here just by adding a few simple styles. And then the color is going to be something not so dark. Okay. I think I just stumbled upon something really interesting here, which I definitely want to explain. So hex colors come with 2 variants that you can use. So I'm going to set just a property here so we can see. This is going to be white. This is 3 values. They're hexadecimal from 0 all the way up to F. So the property would be 0, or like each one of these characters can be arranged from 0 all the way up to F. And this is called hexadecimal. Now along this range, 0 is going to be the darkest, and F is going to be the lightest or the most of that color. So in this key right here of FFF, you have 3 values that are all set to the lightest, and that's RGB. So for instance, if I wanted R all the way to the top and no GB, then I would go F00, and that would result in a color with F, or rather G, or R, the red, being full tilt and absolutely no green or blue in it. And then again, you can add F over here, and you'll get full red, full blue, and no green, and that results in pink. And then if you add F here, that's full red, full green, full blue. You now have white. Okay. Sorry for that tangent there. So that's what hex is. Now to fine-tune it, each one of these digits can be, you can use 2 digits to define each RGB item. So if I wanted to use the 6-character format, we now have white, but now these 2 characters represent red. These 2 characters now represent green, and the last 2 represent blue. So if I want full-on red, I do this, all right? And now we have this range. So the first, think about it like counting. When you get to 20s, the second digit is going to change for smaller increments. And that's exactly the same here. So if I start changing the second parameter, I can go all the way down to F0 before it flips around again and starts going EF. That would be the next one down, and then EE, etc., etc. All right? So that's how hex colors work. And I just found a really interesting CSS thing that I didn't even know was integrated. And if you guys knew this, then I'm terribly sorry for wasting your time. Skip ahead about a minute. But we can use a 4-digit hex code, and the last digit is defining opacity. So 1 there is not very opaque, but if I set that to 5, it's fully opaque. So if I were to set F00, 1, kind of opaque, 2, and as I go up, it gets more and more opaque. Which is just, that just kind of blew me away there. All right, anyway, sorry about that. We're going to set this to the color of the buttons. So I'm going to copy all of this, and I'm going to paste it right here and save it. And now we've got our buttons. Now the input field needs to change a bit too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a height equal to 100 pixels. We're going to set the width to 100%. Border is going to be none. Text align is going to be right. And then font size is going to be, I don't remember, oh, we set that to 32 pixels. All right. Actually, let's add a bit of padding. So let's say 10 pixels. And that's making it too wide. I wonder if I set position to relative or max width to 100 view width. Still going to do that. So we're going to do then set width to auto, and then we're going to say margin right 0 and then float right. Alright, so now the margin right, let's set to 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 50. Alright, there we go. So this is our, let me go into app, see what class name we gave that, result. So input.result. copy this here, get rid of that dead rule, save. And there we go. So now we have a mostly stylized calculator in React that is using the state up here. And what we need to do is we need to set sort of operations in a flow. So if we were to look at how a calculator like this handles it, I can type 2, 4, 5 times, and it saves the value and then puts a times sign here, and then the next input that I put in sets that. Alright, so we're going to do something very, very similar. So what we're going to need is, I think we can do it the array way. I'm going to use previous here, and I'm going to need to render that out, kind of floating above this. So I want to put in an if condition, and if, this state, I can't do it like this though. Okay, I'm just going to write the condition here itself, just like we did in the past. So this dot state dot previous length is over 0. We're going to put a question mark. So if that rings true, we're going to do something else, and we define else by that little colon. We're going to create a div class name floaty last, sure. And then we're going to this dot state dot previous, and we're going to get the last item out of it. So this dot state dot previous dot length -1. Then we're going to close that div. So I'm going to save this, and what we need to do is when we press on divide, times, minus, or plus, these need to have a different action than all of these other buttons. So add to current is going to test if, let's create an array of all the possible symbols that we want to do something different with. And then it was a capital X. So if this dot index of symbol is more than -1, we're going to do something. And if it's not, we're going to do the same old add to current. So I'm going to save. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the current operation, or the state current, and we're going to add that to the previous array. So I'm going to let previous equals this dot state. So we're going to get the previous array. We're going to do previous dot concat, and I'm going to this dot state dot current plus symbol, and then we're going to set the state. So this dot set state previous, and we can either define that as a property and then the value here, like so, like we mostly always do. But if it's the same name, so where we've got that variable from the state, we don't have to do this. We can set it like this, and what this will do is it will use that for a key name, and it will use the value of previous as the value. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to hit save, and then we're going to say 65 times. And I didn't see that happen. Maybe let's try and find our floaty. No. All right, let's go ahead and look at React. And the previous array is still nothing, so this is not working. Add to current symbol. So let's push instead of concat. Let me try that. So we're definitely passing that check there. 65 times. There we go. Just couldn't concatenate it. So then this floaty bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to style this really quick. I'm going to say position absolute. Right is going to be 50 pixels. Z index is going to be 99. And then top is going to be about 10 pixels. And color is going to be gray. And there we go. So floaty last is going to be styled as such. Save this. And now another thing that we need to do is if this dot current is just 0, and I mean we could do like that, right? So if 0 and if symbol is not a dot, so what we're going to say is if this dot state dot current equals 0. So a little note on this, we're using the 3 equal signs and it's going to test the value and the type. So this is a string where the value is 0. This is the basically required. So if it's 0 and symbol is not equal to dot, we're going to do the same thing that we're currently doing. Actually, no. That's not a dot. You will just return symbol. So it's going to set it. Let me save this. Show you. So this is 0, and when I hit 6, it's going to change the input to 6. Else, we need to have that concatenated this dot state dot current and then plus the symbol. So I'm going to save it, and now we can type 65, and it replaced that 0. Take away, and this is a good setup. See this? Now when we hit a number where the last operation was a one of these, we need to do a check. So if one of these, when we set the state, we also need to set replace next. So we're going to need a new property in the state. Next is reset. It's going to be false. And then when this is true, when we enter one of these values, we're going to set next is reset equal to true. And then I'm going to save this. And we need to catch that in here. So the way that we're going to do that is going to be if we can actually key into that right there. So I'm going to wrap this into parentheses, and then I'm going to use an OR statement. This dot state next is reset. So I'm going to save this. And then we're going to say next is reset. It's going to be false. I'm going to save it. and then we'll go over what I've just done in just one moment. Let me show you guys first. 65 plus 24. So the flow of this right here, let me reset it, and this doesn't do anything right now. Let me go up to reset, results. Oh, current. Yeah, that's right. Current is going to be 0. Should we also remove the previous? I feel like we should. Previous is basically that C button is going to reset the app altogether. So I guess again we should do next is reset just in case they reset under a certain circumstance. Alright, so we've got 65 plus 24. We can reset it. There we go. And this is all managed. Now that equal sign, we're going to have to do something different. And I think we've... Alright, add to current. So instead of on equal, we're going to add to current, we're going to say calculate. I'm going to save. And then what we're going to calculate is going to be 54 plus 32. Alright, so in this instance, what we're going to calculate, we're going to take the current value, and we're going to take this, and let me check if we can do something really unsafe here. We can evaluate that. That's exactly what we're going to do. It's really not safe, but to cut corners right now, that's exactly what we're going to do. So when the equal is set, we need a method called calculate. It's going to take in the symbol. We really don't care about the symbol, but just with the way that we've rigged up the button to pass that to the action, we're going to have to take it in anyway. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the last from the previous array. We're going to get the current. We're going to evaluate it and set that to the current and erase the previous, essentially ending up with a result. Alright, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to change the symbol of the multiply from that to that just because. Let's go ahead and get this done. So from the state, I'm going to get current, previous, and next is reset from this dot state. Now I'm going to say current is going to be equal to, well, we're going to need to do some error checking here. So if there is a previous, so if previous dot length is greater than 0, then we're going to move forward and we're going to say current equals previous dot length minus 1. So we're going to get the last array item in the previous array. So current is that plus current. And we're going to need to evaluate this. So now that I've got those two strings concatenated, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure I'm getting a string while I'm using these operators in here. I wouldn't want those to interfere with the evaluation. And then I'm going to wrap that in an eval method like so. And then we're going to call this dot set state on current, previous, and next is reset. It's going to be equal to true. So let's go ahead and save this. Alright, let's see what this can do. So I'm going to say 25 plus 35 equals 60, and we didn't clear previous yet. I forgot. We're going to have to do that. So I'm just setting that to an empty array. So let's say 72 times 12 equals, and something messed up there. Let's reset, 25 plus. Okay, so I forgot when I added this symbol here and replaced the old X symbol. See, we need that in here to do the same thing that we're doing with the other symbols, to add to previous and whatnot. So now we have a calculator and it should work. We should be able to first resize, and it's alright. I mean, it's responsive, but if you load it really big, it's going to look terrible. That's fine for now. Let's go 32 divided by 12 equals 2.6. And I mean, we're getting results. That is good stuff. Let's say 56 plus 2 is 58 plus 652, 710 plus 53 times. Now here's where we're going to have a problem, and I don't think we're going to cover that just because we are at about a half hour for this video, and so I think that's where we're going to leave it for right now. See, 0.223 times 2 equals 0.446. There we go, you guys. We've just built a calculator using React and the state and the props and a bunch of other stuff. I hope you guys have learned a lot. I'm going to add this code to GitHub, so look in the description or the discussion to get the link to the project if you want to have it as reference. But go ahead and build a calculator. This is just the beginning. We are going to get into much, much cooler things. Something that I'm interested in, that I want to work towards, is building a Pong game. It's going to be, we're going to have to find some user flow to be able to set up multiple clients so it can be a multiplayer game experience on 2 different clients. So thank you guys for joining me in this video. In the next video, I want to start looking at Bootstrap. I think we might end up slicing a website, static website, into React and use React as a backend for it.